Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the village joint meeting of the Board of Trustees and the Finance Committee is called to order. Roll call, please.
Trustee Williams? Here. Trustee Wilson? Here. Trustee Brooks?
Present.
Trustee McMullen? Trustee Oscar Brown? Mayor Cousins?
Trustee Payton, here.
I'm sorry, Trustee Payton, I'm sorry. I put it way too long.
Gotcha.
Finance Committee, Sandra Hurd.
Andre Covington. David Saliba. Warren Hunter. Robert Travis.
Any general comments, general public comments at this time? General public comments? Hearing none, chairperson's report. New business, finance. Just go through it. That's what I meant, new business item.
Finance team.
Finance. Can you hear me?
Not
Okay, thank you, I'm sorry. Report from the finance team.
Good afternoon, Madam. Good evening, Madam Mayor. I'm going to present Mr. Dave Phillips from Spirit Financial. He will be going over the financial part.
I can't hear you now, I'm sorry.
I'll be introducing, there we go. I'll be introducing Dave Phillips, who is the representative of Spirit Financial, who assisted with this agenda. So he will kind of lead this discussion, along with the other stakeholders that we have at the table.
Good evening, everybody. Good to be here this evening and appreciate the opportunity. The first page that you see is the financing timetable, and there's a lot of moving parts. This is on the handout that was at your desk before.
Do you have any more handouts?
Treasurer, Stewart.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I just let her sit there. Oh, okay. Don't worry about it.
Would you like to set the agenda?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
As you know, you have a number of moving parts with various audits that are being undertaken. You'll be approving tonight the 2015 audit, at least considering that for approval. And you'll be as well reviewing contracts for the TIF audits for 2017 and 18. And you've retained Bill's firm to deal with the 16, 17, and 18 audits, and those are obviously spread out as work progresses, and one gets finished, the next one gets started and finished, and therefore. So you have the levy that you'll be considering at your December meeting. From a cash flow standpoint, you have a large debt service payment that's due December 1st, and that payment will lead to the necessity to consider some tax anticipation notes in January for being able to meet payroll and other obligations of the village. We're working with both staff and your auditor to deal with some cash flow analysis. so that you'll have an opportunity to understand your cash flow requirements in calendar 19. So, there's a lot of things that are going on, and with after the last of the audits, hopefully by mid-year, you'll be able to talk about some other long-term bonding, whether that's taxable working capital or whether that's tax-exempt bonds for capital projects, or perhaps a mix of those. So, are there any questions so far about the timetable?
Your 1.8, the tax anticipation, that's about an estimate, right? Because I know when I first took.
I just wanted to make sure, because I know that there were some things that when it came to the village climbing out of the hole that we were in, maybe if only one that remember Trustee Peyton, I think we had one more, so about 1.5 would be around exactly, or I just was trying to get a number, make sure, because I knew that we would have to do one or two more tax anticipation in order to put the village where it should be as far as financially, or trying to maintain his bills, paying his bills on time before the next money comes in towards the village.
Right. This is obviously an estimate until the cash flow study is done, and that cash flow study then will be able to quantify the actual dollar levels that were necessary to meet the obligations until taxes are beginning to be received. So,
And which is, for the public, first collection of taxes would be
June,
April, June.
It's May.
It's May?
Last week of May.
Okay.
Before it's the last payment.
it varies a little bit between Cook County and Will County. So.
For the tax anticipation warrant, when would we have to start that process if we needed to try, or is the date that you have here when we will start working on that, the January 8th, or will we need it by January 8th?
Again, the cash flow will be done here, hopefully being able to be presented by your December meeting, so that we'll be able to quantify the initial projections that are necessary, and then we'd proceed from there after your next meeting with the preparation of the tax anticipation notes, and have that available for your January meeting.
So typically from the time, let's assume that we will need a tax anticipation note. From the time that we apply for it, how long does it normally take to receive the funds?
Well, we'll be working with an underwriter, local banks, to as we move through that process, so that once that firm is identified and the cash requirement is quantified, they would be able to move rapidly. We don't wait until formal actions required and then try to make it an emergency. You try to do that, your due diligence, and have those pieces in place at the time that they're necessary.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you saying then that the talk is gonna be funds that will be coming from an independent, or entity, and then provided on the funds that's anticipated to come in June? I believe is when it is in June when it comes in, because the payments are usually not due in Will County until June 1st.
Right. We'll be talking to several financial institutions. The village obviously realizes that you only have your 2015 audit in place. at the time that you're looking for the tax anticipation notes. So, it's going to be a little bit more difficult than if you had current financial information that you were able to communicate that to the investor community. We're not sure yet who the individual, whether it be a bank or an underwriter.
So if we had to go up to the high end where you got 2.3 million, how much would be remaining of that payment? Is it like about 2.6 that we get in the payment from the county?
Again, a tax anticipation note is in anticipation of taxes that you're going to be collecting. So it's not new money, it's early money for you.
Exactly,
So-
that's the point I'm getting to. That's money that's gonna, yes, that's what's gonna be money that's gonna be paid back when we get the money in June. So I'm asking how much would be remaining if we had to go to the 2.3 million?
Depending upon, this is Bill Hanley, and I can't say with absolute certainty, but I would think the May and June distributions from the county should be sufficient to repay that 2.3 million.
And then how much would be left? That's what I'm saying, because we have to go beyond that point with bonds, right? And then also I'd like to know what would be the interest on that.
Well, Dave can speak to the interest rate, but Dave refers to this cash flow analysis that village staff is working on. That will quantify if the entire 2.3 million will be paid with the receipts, property tax receipts that'll be in June, late May, June time.
Right, sir, I think the real estate related taxes that we collected are around 8-9 million. So if you want to look at what would the balance be if we borrowed at the max of 2.3, then you take that away from the roughly 9 million that we collect. That's what we would have remaining for other village obligations.
For the real estate tax, I thought that was about all of the.
No. If you take a look at the audit, the 2015 audit, that's only about 70% of the revenues that are collected by the village.
Manager, could you speak to that? Because I know that we've gone through the budget that you had, and it was like 8 million was what the revenue was. Including the real estate tax.
So as we've stated in multiple meetings, the village gets about a little over $8 million in tax receipts, and that's spread over the obligations that the village has. And that's including debt service. So that's how much we receive. The 2.5 million will be paid back over a period of time, but actual tax monies that come into the village, it comes into village accounts and coffers, other than police and fire pension, which goes to their accounts directly. It ranges to be about $1 million total, and that's for all lines of what's being taxed, including the debt service account. So the answer to your question is $8 million as you look at all the obligations the village has. And the village typically brings in about $2.5 to $3 million, $3.1 million that's dedicated to the general fund. For the general fund. But also, we spoke on obligations that were budgeted in the budget, such as debt service was budgeted as a part of the budget, but we were getting separate funds through a separate deposit of the taxes that were coming in to cover the debt service. So I think for the last 2 or 3 years, we were counting the debt service as additional revenue, that's revenue off the general fund paying that, and not actual the debt service account that the money was coming into. And actually, the village really doesn't have a debt service account that's established. All that money goes actually into the general fund, and then it's distributed, just like we have a payment coming up on December 1st on a bond payment. When that money comes in, the city earmarks that money and then makes the appropriate payment. So in total, as far as village accounts are concerned and what actually comes into the village in tax money, is about eight to 8.5 million. To Trustee Payton's sentiments, as he stated.
Your cash flow study, when are you anticipating that to happen? And what's going to be the results of that when you can deliver it to us?
The plan is by your next meeting, mid-December.
Okay. So it's good.
Obviously, you want to be able to have that cash flow assessment completed in order to have a handle on both the size and duration of the tax anticipation note that you're going to be considering to keep operations going. So it does go hand in hand with these conversations that hopefully are not just a one-time conversation, but an ongoing dialogue about the finances of the village. The next page is the audited multiple year examination of your fiscal years going back to 2006, and would highlight you have budgeted revenues, or you have audited collected revenues, and you have expenses that were incurred. And you can see from a fund balance standpoint that the village has historically had deficits that you have experienced over time. So that and that has accumulated, as you know, so that the deficits that you're averaging, 1,031,000 in 07, 2.5 million in 08, 2.6 million in 09, 5.6 in 2010, 3.2 million in 12, 2.1 million in 13, 4 million in 14, 3.8 million in 15, and projected, the last column in 2016 was unaudited projected year end of a positive 116, but that doesn't include so
116.
We haven't completed the audit yet, but for the fiscal 2016 year, the expenditures are quite a bit lower than 15, as you can see.
Yes.
And that's a combination of things. I'll just mention a couple of them. In 2015, I think you were still handling your garbage collection differently.
Yes.
You
Right.
collected it and then paid out for the services. That was probably $700,000 of expenditures that went away. Also in the 2015 year, there was probably $1 million of engineering fees that weren't in 2016. I don't know if that was for the metro station or some other, I don't know specifically. I can get that detail, but so there were some, I don't want to call them one-time expenses in 15, but that explains the reduction in expenditures from 15 to 16. There are, I think, also some insurance cost differentials there. So what I think the key here,
And you say insurance, medical, or just?
I think general liability. General liability, okay. But the purpose of this is to show the history of deficits, and there's some improvement in 16, but there has to be continued improvement. And there's got to be, serious efforts made to watch your expenditures, and there's been, progress made, but it just has to continue. There's another worksheet, not to jump ahead, but the budget for I think the FY19 budget was, has it been passed? I'm not sure. It has been passed. That budget had a budgeted deficit of $400,000. You know, so that's, you know, a lot of municipalities try for a balanced budget, and we have to either have additional revenue sources or reduce expenses. Actually, I got the number here. It's on a few pages back. It's a deficit of $305,000.
I'm noticing here, and I'm kind of happy about it finally, we did, the current board here, worked hard on getting that one garbage thing was a killer to us. That's eliminated. That was a good, positive thing for us. And I noticed we went from 5 million now to 116,000. That's a big difference in 2016.
Right.
Which is great. That's fabulous, actually. And there are going to be other cuts. We just got good news from our fire department on a negotiation that they just did, which is going to help tremendously as far as budget cuts. My thing is, and I'm glad to see we're finally getting caught up with our audit, since there was not one when I came on board in 2008. We hadn't had one since 2008, and now we're current up to 2016, and that's great that we're finally getting closer and closer to have current audit. So I'm glad about the figures, and we can finally see where our money is. Because I said, you can tell me what money you had, and you hadn't had an audit since 2008. So here it's showing actual figures. Okay, thank you.
This worksheet also shows the enterprise funds that the golf course and the town center typically show a deficit of $500,000 to $750,000 every year. So for the 11 years shown here, there's been a cumulative deficit in just those two funds of $6.5 million. And the cumulative deficit on the general and non-major funds, and this doesn't exclude any TIF activity, is almost $30 million. Any other questions?
To make a difference in that as well with the golf course.
Excuse me?
We're working on that as well, the golf course. To
Right.
make that different and make that more positive. So if things go as planned, we'll show a big improvement on that by next year.
The arrangement with the Billy Casper Golf, it's what, like a $50,000 a month, basically? That's not.
No, we have to keep a $50,000 reserve.
Balance.
And for a while,
Okay.
we were paying, having to replenish the reserve, but this fiscal year, it was dropped to $200,000. They're supposed to be cash flow neutral.
Right.
No, you're absolutely right. That was an improvement. And then I think the town center has to be addressed too, either marketing efforts or increased rental marketing efforts. So,
And that is ongoing right now. We just moved one person in. We have 5 more people we're interviewing for spots in the town center. So,
Now,
we should see improvement there.
one of the other things that we found out from the work that IRH Development, their efforts in trying to help us to clean up the mess is that obviously with the TIFs, there was a lot of just bad accounting related to that. And so these numbers won't reflect that because we were paying things out of the general fund for the TIFs. And I mean, there were a lot of things wrong that were going on. So I'm hoping we'll see, once the TIF audits are completed, exactly where we are. Or do you feel these numbers accurately represent?
I'll make this statement, and I'll speak in general terms, but these operating deficits of about $35 million, okay, that money had to come from somewhere, okay? And the TIFs were a source of some of it, and beginning general fund cash balances were part of it. I can't give you the exact breakdown, but I think these operating deficits are accurate for each of the years shown, and cumulatively also, so.
And something came up last evening, and I'd like to see a new format or change. What I'd like to see is our TIFs, every TIF that we have in every TIF area, 1 through 6 now. And I'd like to see the balance. I'd like to see the payments, when the payments are due, what money we owe when they make payments. We want to see that because I don't think, like last evening, there was a question about voting on it, but we need to see, actually, the board suggested, some of the board members here, Trustee Wilson and Trustee Brooks, we would like to see the actual TIFs, what we owe, if we owe, the payments that are made to us, the payments that we're supposed to make as well, and the time frame, the scheduling of all payments, if that's possible. I'd like to print out that for everyone on the board.
Okay, I think that we can help village staff or, that information. We can work together to get that information.
Everybody's current. So, thank you.
The other thing to note in the middle table, the middle of that table are the TIF transfers. And you can see that there's been $14.3 million at that point that have been transferred in from the tax increment areas of the village. So, as Bill has indicated, that has tended to prop up the operations of the village, and they don't go away. They're owed back to those tax increment districts, so it becomes an ongoing liability that you have.
Question. These transfers, have none of them been repaid back to the tax, or it's just the numbers to show the total that has been transferred? Does it not reflect any of the monies that have been paid back to the tax?
No, I mean, these are the existing obligations. If there was revenues that went back, it would have reduced the deficit.
Right, there's no
So-
money paid back.
That's the purpose of the schedule that I'd like to see. We can see what went on. Sorry.
I know we've been paying some of our obligations.
You have obligations, that's why I said there's a schedule of obligation payments that they're supposed to do. I've seen it before, and I haven't seen it for a while, and I would like to see that. That when we have our obligations, tips, because you look at this chart you just gave us, in 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, all these TIF transfers, 2006 to 2011, and they were all over millions. And then in 2012, there was one for 400,000, and that was it. And we made sure that didn't happen anymore. So that's why it's necessary for us to see the TIF scheduling.
When you say the TIF obligations, you mean the redevelopment agreements, what goes back?
Yes, yes.
Right.
They pay what redevelopment agreements, what we're paying them, what we owe them, what is owed, what the original cost, everything from the beginning to the end.
So, Mayor, to answer your question and your concerns, the village was behind the TIF audits. The TIF audits have to be completed and filed in order to know what is truly owed to the TIF. So we can't come up with a plan to repay until the audits are caught up. So we're working on that. The audits will be caught up all the way up to 16 at this point. And then tonight, you have a letter of engagement for 17 and 18. Once those reports are done and filed, and we have either a balance owed to the TIF or a balance owed to the general fund, however it comes out, then at that time, we'll have to do a plan in order to do a repayment of that. But
Right. But I'd like to see, I'm sorry, but there are schedules. There were schedules, as I saw it.
So-
Before, the schedules of the regional agreement, TIF agreements, the redevelopment agreements.
Correct, Mayor.
So, yeah, that's what I'm talking about mainly. And, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So we're still, at this point, playing catch-up. And
Right.
Because a lot of the TIF agreements were executed. They did not have any certification of redevelopment costs. Montana and Welsh has been working with a majority of the businesses to get their certification of redevelopment costs to prove the monies that are actually owed. So you have some businesses that are behind 2 years. You have one business that we're currently in litigation with because we believe we don't owe them the money. Same thing, similar to Clorox situation. So we've been in contact with the comptroller's office. So until the TIF audits are complete and accepted, and these audits got to come back before the board for the board to accept the numbers. Once they're accepted and uploaded to the comptroller's website, at that time, then a liability is established. But it should be made very clear, noteworthy, that there is no liability to the taxing bodies until the TIF closes. So upon the TIF closing, then that TIF is reconciled, and then they have a final balance. Some of the TIF preliminary information, such as TIF 1 and maybe a couple other TIFs, may owe the general fund money, and then preliminarily, more specifically TIF 5, we know for certain will owe the TIFs money because of the payroll transactions that were coming out of them. But for us to begin payment before audits are finalized and formal documentation submitted to the comptroller's office is premature because there may have been some reimbursable costs that the village did not catch. Thus is why we're doing these audits and getting everything up to date. And my suggestion, Madam Mayor, I agree with you. The board should have visibility of it. I believe an ordinance should be passed directing whoever is the village manager, whoever's in the seat, to produce certain reports and have a process and procedure put in place, order and procedure. So I do agree with you. So we can all be clear on that direction and what is required to approve these payments and not.
And so this will not happen anymore, ever again.
Yes, ma'am.
So we can be on top of all these payments and the audits. And that's the purpose of some of the problems that we're having because we don't have current audits. That's why we can't get certain things or certain loans and grants because we don't have current audits. So when this is like bouncing your checkbook, if you don't know how much money you have, why should I give you some more money to put in the bank? And you don't even know what you have yourself. So, I'm sorry.
I would hope that this evening's conversation, is broad enough that you can understand the historical trends that are involved with municipal finance, and that there does have to be obviously improved reporting that the staff is, I'm sure, going to be working on, and Bill can assist them, in that process so that it becomes more transparent than perhaps it has been historically. That is a microcosm of the operating budget, that is a separate issue. And unfortunately, there is going to have to be not just nibbling around the edges of fiscal control and revenue enhancement, but there have to be really a game plan that's put in place so that you not only are just treading water, but that you're actually gaining ground and being able to begin to reimburse some of those borrowings that you've had. So it is not going to be painless, certainly, and it's not going to be easy because there are going to be very probably some difficult decisions that the village is going to have to make about your operations and the level of those operations. Many, frankly, with the golf being a declining sport, many that own public golf courses are repurposing them for other purposes so that they're not subsidized. Perhaps your contract with that facilitator will help in that way, but obviously we have a lot of work to do.
And that's our plan, is to have a workshop with the board so we can put these policies in place and procedures on how we can improve our financial situation, stability, and automation. I totally believe in automation, so that would give transparency and accountability. So when you're looking for something, you shouldn't have to search through papers or whatever. We will start automating it that way. We can pinpoint, see what we're doing, make separate files, automate it, monies go through separately and automatically. And I like that a lot, so that way there's accountability. When you know where your money is going, we should generate something that I can push a button one day and say, okay, how much money have we received, a revenue report immediately. I should have to figure and find it. So we're in the process of planning that, and the board's going to have another workshop with retreat to discuss such a thing and put these policies and measures in place so that we won't have to be stumbling or fumbling or questioning where is this, how is this done. We'll make that happen for us to be doing on a regular basis. So we're in the process of that, and I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you.
I just want to clarify one additional comment or point on the schedule. For the years 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, the practice of actually transferring amounts changed, and there was still money moved from the TIFs, but it was shown as inter-fund activity. So it's a little bit of an accounting discussion, but these operating deficits each year were really funded by TIF dollars. That was the only source of funds. So just to clarify that point.
Thank you.
Before 2011, right? You said for
After.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Change to make it better.
Oh, okay.
I have one more question on the TIF before you go on, and just a clarification for my other class. Thank you. I understand that the 14 million is the amount that was transferred, and that I heard the village manager say that until the TIF audits are complete, we won't really know how much of that we owe still, right? And that the TIF audits are separate from the general bond audits that we've got, right? How far behind are we in the TIF audits?
Actually, Madam Mayor, and to all of you, the TIF 1 and the TIF 2 audits have been completed from 2013 to 2016. Actually, they're 100% complete.
Yes, I see.
On the TIF 1 and the TIF 2, getting the engagement here for 2017 and 2018, with a lot of hard work, we can get those TIF 1 and TIF 2 done for 17 and 18 by mid-December, certainly no later than the end of next month. And then for TIFs 3 and 4, we have completed 2015 through 2016. So for both TIF 3 and TIF 4, we're about 98% complete for years 2015 and 2016. And similarly, for TIFs 3 and 4, for years 2017 through 2018, will be finished between mid-December and the end of December 2018. And as we look at the last two TIFs, TIF 5 is 90% complete for years 15.
I'm sorry, I was asking what page you were looking at.
Oh, I just brought it, I'm sorry.
I can't remember all this.
We can email it to you.
Okay.
Because tonight, we are not prepared to do anything but give an update. We'll give the mayor and all of you all the details you need through your village manager as time progresses.
Yes.
But for TIF 5, 2015 and 2016, 98% complete for TIF 5. For TIF 6, 2015 and 2016 is complete, 100%. And lastly, for TIFs 5 and TIF 6, for the 2 years of 17 and 18, it should be completed by mid-December or the end of the month. I've already begun to talk and work with Bill here so that all the numbers are in order.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Any more TIF questions? The next pages are your levy edit reports from Will and Cook County. This is just to somewhat remind the board as you deal with levies, that you levy by fund, and that you have various special purpose funds as well as a general purpose fund. So your IMRF, Social Security, police and fire pension, and those other levies are all special purpose, so that those are only able to be used for that particular purpose. Your general corporate fund is your more fluid fund that you can use for multiple purposes. So this is your 2017 levy edit reports for both Will County and Cook County in a combined fashion. So you can see, we talked before about the tax revenues that are being generated. You'll be considering the 2018 levy at your next meeting.
So you mentioned all these funds above, but you didn't mention, I kind of know what all those mean. The last fund, garbage, what is that? You just talked about the corporate fund, the IMRS, Social Security, police and fire, capital improvement. What's that last fund?
Well, there is no levy for that garbage that you had in 2017.
Right. We got rid of it.
Oh, I see the zero. I thought it was saying 5.4 million.
No, zero.
I was like,
Zero. We don't do that anymore.
There should be a line there because that's the aggregate.
oh, okay.
And I think that was on the total.
Yeah, that's the total. Okay, I got it.
After those Will and Cook County levy edit reports, there's a history of the levies for the village from 2013 through 2017 are obviously actuals, and you'll be considering the 2018 levy at your next meeting. That's a preliminary number that John had provided as at least for discussion purposes on the 2018 levy.
Am I saying this correct with 9?
Am I saying this correct? 9.9? Wait a minute.
Wait a minute, what are you talking about? 20% change? What? No.
You talking about page 7?
Page
Page 7.
What you're reviewing is past tax levies.
Okay.
What you see is a simulation. That's not what the levy is going to be.
Okay.
Okay,
good.
myself, the auditor, and the Spear Financial were looking at percentages and looking at what other municipalities have done in the area over the last couple of years. This is not a factual number. It's just showing the board the difference between the tax levy of 4.99 that the board typically passes and one time it was 0, 4.99 minimum, and it's showing you what the difference is between tax years if you levy 4.99 and 9.90. It also should be made noteworthy that this projection was made because you have a business coming online into the tax rolls, and that'd be applied systems for the next tax year. So I wanted to simulate to the board what it would look like as far as tax revenues coming in between tax year 17 and tax year 2018. And to be clear, I will be meeting with the village attorney tomorrow at their offices to look at historic data, make a determination, and provide a recommendation to the board in writing prior to anything being provided to the board in regards to a tax levy. But I just want to be clear that it is a simulated number, not an actual number.
And I want that perfectly clear, because I don't want this piece of paper going out on next door We're getting ready to do a levy of 9.9.
Understood.
That's not true. We haven't even discussed that. It's not a discussion, it's not happening.
Manager paid,
We'll just get out.
manager paid the 2016, but that was the actual, the 705. Is that, that's the actual levy, right? That was,
No, that's the percent change.
that's the percent change? Okay,
Yes,
okay.
some percent change line.
Okay, thank you, I apologize.
No worries.
I have a question over here.
Yes.
Yeah, but as you know, statutorily, you don't have enough time to do more than 4.9%.
No, we don't. No, that time has passed. So more likely than not, it'd be between 0 and 4.99.
Did you hear that, people? Yeah. Thank you.
One of the things, obviously, to consider during the time that you're considering the levy and the amount of any levy increase is the counterbalancing $300,000 deficit from a budget standpoint of what you've approved for the 2019 budget. So it all works hand in glove to a certain extent. So. Again, the 2018 is not historical, it's just at the staff level at this juncture.
Ms. Hurd.
Yeah, so I was just gonna ask for clarification. I know you said you were giving this as a sort of a semblance or representation of what it would, we may have as increased revenue when we have like applied system, for instance, coming off the tip. But it still would be the same percentage of whatever we're gonna be getting. It's gonna still be applied. You know, it's not going to result in us getting more, like 8% as opposed to 4.9.
And that, you're exactly right. Even if that simulation was true, the residents in realistic time would not see that percentage increase. Actually, when we do the research, if that simulated number was to occur, the residents would probably see about a 2% increase in their tax bill, not a 9.90 increase.
Again, as you know, that you have different quadrants of equalized assessed value, so you have industrial, commercial, residential. So the tax burden is obviously allocated not strictly on residential, but it's based on all your different taxing categories.
Right, I was gonna say, manager paid, 'cause I can't remember, what was our last for the village, but to be honest, for the residents to know, it's not us that's going up, it's the school. They're like at 8, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not the village that's killing the residents, it's the school district. I mean, we're just doing the best we can because of the way the finances. And I mean, if I'm wrong, someone correct me, but if I remember breaking down that tax bill this last time, and the reason why I do it, I take pride because I'm just as responsible for this, that when it came to the finances, I'm seeing where we're cutting back and we're trying to pay bills and the village manager is working with us as much as possible to try to get this under control, and then you get a tax bill where they at 8 point whatever, their portion of the tax bill.
And realistically, there are some taxing bodies that are in the process of going through the public hearing process to go above, the limit of 4.99. Like I said, this simulation was done maybe about 3 or 4 months ago when we were trying to look at doing future budgets. I will tell you, these gentlemen sitting here at this table, we have conference calls and we do a lot of things as far as trying to figure out where additional revenues we can cut, what can we do. Part of the discussion is regards to reducing the number of properties that the village owns. For example, the town center, when you have an occupied unit in the town center, the village pays taxes just like any other place. For multiple years, up until this year, we were paying out more in taxes than we were bringing in revenue as far as rent. So you have to look at, is it conducive to continue to pay taxes on a property that we're not getting money from? But at this point, the town center has bounced back. We've made a lot of people accountable that were renting in the town center that wasn't paying rent. So, you know, we're looking at those things. The board, you know, in the next month and a half, I'll be requesting the board to look at the pool, the farm, properties that we're not using. Is it realistic for the village to keep those properties in our coffers? Is it realistic to potentially sell those properties? I don't have the answer. I'm not saying either way, but we have to have these constructive conversations because those are liabilities that the village is responsible for. Even though we're not using those facilities, I'm still paying for liability insurance for those buildings. You know, so you can imagine how much you pay in insurance for your home. Imagine how much we pay as a municipality for properties that we own and do not use at all.
And that's just revenue we steady kicking out that we could be okay.
So instead of the properties being productive, they're not. They're putting a strain on the village's resources. We're paying taxes on those properties, majority of those properties. You have the pool that's been closed for 3 years. You have Regal Farm that's been closed for 2 years. So a lot of these things, instead of kicking the can down, the board has to provide me direction on what to be done to those things, because we have to kind of figure those things out.
Yeah, Manager Pate, at one point, I think it's before your time, even as a police chief, we talked about replatting the town center here.
Right.
So that, so, you know, if you set it up like a condo type thing where each unit has got its own tax number, then the properties that we use for the village would not be taxed, but the commercial pieces would. So I think that's something that we should maybe look at, yeah, as a possibility also.
Yeah, in terms of the levy, let's say that everything stayed stable with 2017, even if you took a 4.99%, that'll give you $276,000, which is close to the 305 you need. So if it was any new property in Will County, you may be able to reach that with just one with that 4.99%. So
yeah, and realistically, we brought this up maybe a week ago. The village is actually in a place where this upcoming budget could potentially be balanced, based on that fact.
Based on that levy, yeah.
It could be balanced. I always am cautious when we're doing budgeting because, as the board knows, we've dealt with many situations where the budget was completed and numbers were added and just thrown in and showed a balanced budget, but it really realistically wasn't. But this upcoming budget year, we're very close to hitting that mark.
I still think you're high, but in terms of the other taxing entities, in terms of them levying, I mean, residents as well as village officials have a right to go to those entities, and you all do have an opportunity to contest those levies that they're doing. You just have to be able to do it in a timely fashion, get your residents to sign petitions and do what you need to do. So just because they're levying for more than 5% does not mean that you do not have a way to get around that. And not doing anything only allows them to continue to build on that. So,
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Manager Pate, does the budget for, well, I mean, let's see, we'll be putting that together by February, but the applied systems real estate taxes that we will start receiving from them since their tip is over with, will that be factored in? Because that's got to be a pretty big piece. It's got to be close to $400,000.
you only want to get your portion.
And that'll be about, they're paying over $1 million a year in taxes, right? So our portion would be about $400,000. Huh?
You're only about 12, so you're only, you're only about 12, so it's about 120,000.
We're only about,
What's our tax?
the village is about 40% is about 40% of the tax bill, isn't it?
No, what is the village's tax rate right now?
Assessors right over there.
Is where?
No, it's like below, it's around 5. Of the 16%.
Right, so you only gonna get 5 of that $1 million.
How much?
5%.
Of that $1 million. That's all the village is gonna see.
I don't think that's correct. No.
That's a lot of land. That's a
Well-
lot of land again. There.
But what I'm looking at is the proportion of the villages to the total tax bill that's collected, all the taxing bodies.
Right, all
We constitute probably about 40% of the total tax bill. The school district is probably 50 or
no, the
slightly
school
more.
district is probably about 70% of the tax. You haven't looked at it lately, it's about 70%. So the school district is gonna get about $700,000 from there, and we only gonna end up with about $100-some thousand.
Right. I'm getting the actual numbers.
But,
Okay, so the village has,
use the mic.
okay. The village has, in this current year, 5.9%.
So you get 6%.
The school district has 8.7. The total is like 16.9. So we only get 5.9.
So we'll be roughly a third.
No. No.
5 out of 16?
But Charlie just said, yeah, it's 5 out of 16. Tax rate.
Yes,
Roughly?
yes. But we don't get 1/3 of what they pay in taxes though.
What?
I don't know to debate, but if we had applied systems bill, we'd be able to figure it out. We just don't have it here today.
Right.
So whatever that number would be, it's going to be a good increase for all the taxing
Yeah.
districts because TIP 3, the ordinance to close TIP 3 was passed earlier
month.
this fall.
Yeah.
I believe.
They're paying about, what was it, $1.2 million, $1.3 million?
Correct.
So we'll factor that, we'll get the accurate number. So my question is, regardless of whether it's 100,000 or 350,000, we haven't factored that in yet, or will we be factoring that in as part of our cash flow for the next go round?
So that would be would not be able to be factored into next budget year. So by the time it comes offline and levies are done, levy is approved by the board, verification comes to the manager's office, January, February timeframe. I sign off on it, then it's applied to the bills. It'll start during that first disbursement in May, going to December. So we won't realistically see anything until the next budget year. So it wouldn't be accounted for this budget year, but it would be accounted for next budget year.
So we don't reimbursement that $1.3 million, which is coming out of our coffers, not coming out of the school district's coffers, right?
Yeah, but the school district wouldn't get that. You would get it.
Well,
It only ends at the end of this year
They've got a whole bunch
So-
of stuff.
it ended last year.
No, three was officially closed last month.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this year.
this year, they got a whole bunch
But
of-
their obligation was ended.
Oh yeah, the obligation was ended. Yes, correct. So when the tip 3 is actually closed at the county and state district, there will be a surplus that will be distributed to the taxing bodies. Once the issue is we cannot close, even though we passed the ordinance to close tip 3, similar to 1 and 2 that we're dealing with now. Because the board closed the tip until the tip is formally audited and closed at the county as well as the state, then that's when that money is sent to the state to be distributed to the taxing bodies. So at this point, per the ordinance that was done for TIF 3 upon closure, the village is holding on to that money as an escrow dollar amount until everything is closed at the county and state level. Then the village is to cut a check to the state, and they'll do the distribution of the excess funds to the various taxing bodies. So we realistically, according to when we close the TIF with the county and state, it may be realized this budget year. The escrow amount or the amount that's left in the TIF may be realized money that comes in before the next budget year, but until we get the audits done and we know where we're at, then at that point we'll account for it. So actually, the deficit that you see here will actually decrease, and the board more than likely than not upon getting this tax anticipation warrant, there would be an amendment to the budget that would be done in regards to the revenues coming in and various other adjustments. So that those adjustments may actualize to a balanced budget. And then we're also looking at TIF 7, it opening up. And if you have a developer that breaks ground in the spring, prior to then the budget year, you have to actualize those numbers and permit fees and various other costs owed to the village. So there are other additional revenue sources that I'm not going to write down as coming in until I can verify that, but there are additional revenue sources that will be coming in between now and May 1st of next year.
Right. Now, I had a conversation, I recall, that Applied Systems, since their redevelopment agreement has now ended, can be removed from the TIF without closing the TIF. So if they're removed from the TIF, then those taxing, the monies that they pay in taxes then would go to the taxing bodies. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I think
Right.
upon
And that's what I'm talking. Huh?
It'll be in the levy. It'll be in the levy dollar.
Right, but I'm looking at what we would then get as a village because they are no longer in the TIF.
I get you.
Yeah, okay. And that, only because it relates to the deficit.
I think you'll be good if you, with the 4.99, I don't see a good problem.
Okay. All right.
The next page is really just looking at the last column because these are budgeted revenues and expenses that we've already gone through the actual levied or the audited numbers. But this is the $305,000 that Bill had referenced before of the 2019 budget that you've approved. So, you know, that number does need to get down to zero, if not into plus territory, as you know.
That's a nice low.
The last page is looking at, we have currently an equalized assessed value of 113 million. That is obviously changing over time with the expiration of the TIF that you've already talked about, and the other movement that would take place as other TIFs are expired and move that property tax level into the public territory as opposed to retained within the tax increment area. But if, in theory, if you kept the exact same equalized assessed value, the question would be, when your bonds are retiring, and you can see that you have bonds that are retiring from the 1998, 2002, and 2003.
1998.
The
Oh, yeah,
98s are
2002,
actually being paid off as we, probably here in December, because it's a 2017 levy for collections in 2018. But you would be able to generate about $12.6 million of very probably taxable working capital that would not be an increase in taxes, but would be a continuation of your tax rate that you're presently paying for debt service for the bonds that you presently have outstanding. So you'd be able to filter in that 12.6 million of new money that we ran this as a taxable issue so that you would be able to take that 12 million or 12.6 million and reimburse some of those deficits so that you'd be able to erase those deficits. So that's not new capital money, but that's strictly a working capital from a cash flow standpoint.
So if you made that recommendation, if they took the 12.6, would you have them pay off these last two remaining bonds before they start distributing those?
No, those those bonds are callable, and so we could certainly look at from a liability standpoint and a cost-benefit standpoint but you can't really issue new debt until your 15 audit is approved, then the 16, 17, and 18s are done. So that's why we had that original schedule. If you look at the front page there with looking at May or June of 2019 of when the audits would be completed. So this would be a point of conversation as you get closer to having current audits that would be able to be then communicated to the market.
I get that, but let me ask the question a different way. Would you ask them to go out and bond 12.6 million, or would you ask them to go out and bond 17 million to refinance these last two notes?
The current model just shows the new money at 12.6, so we have not tried to look at the refunding or restructuring of the 03 and the 02 issues yet.
Either way, it's two options out there. At the end of the day, the board has to drive that direction, what direction they want to go in regards to that, as far as what's advantageous or not.
Right, the primary thing, and this was just the fill solution, up to the $1.1 million that you're presently paying. So, the question becomes one of eventually whether it's 12 million or 17 million, the annual debt service would still have to be in that 1.1 level to be a break-even situation for the village. So, if the refunding was not cost beneficial to the village, then obviously you wouldn't do it. But if it saved you money, you obviously would do it.
So that brings up another question then. The 1.1 million is the current debt service amount, and you're saying staying within that. Staying within that number frame. So what interest rate would have to be, employed on these, say, 12.6 in order to stay within that 1.1 million repayment?
Right, we use 5% as a taxable interest rate. Again, this is a model. We don't know until we get further downstream and your audits get completed. And who knows what the market is going to be in June of 2019. But from a modeling standpoint, this is a really relatively realistic and conservative interest rate.
But do you think that would be for our situation?
Right, and again, it would be taxable. You can issue tax exempt bonds for capital projects, but you can only issue taxable bonds for working capital. This is really looking at working capital so that it begins to erase and remove some of the deficits that from where you borrowed the funds.
And so when we're talking in the future, when we talk about between April and June of 2019, we're looking at two bond issues: the taxable working income, but also a bond issue that comes out to be about $1.2 to $1.3 million to deal with all residential road repairs. That'll be enough to do all residential road repairs based on the 5-year plan that Robinson Engineer provided. And I think it's very important when we pull this money that we kind of invest the money in something that's beneficial to the village, such as road repairs and other infrastructure updates. We've been working on a 5-year plan that's been recycled because the monies are not available. We have Abbott Amherst. We went out to bid on that. The bid came out, I think for Amherst, it came out to be about $450,000 to redo that whole street based on the damages. And then Amherst came out to be about $150,000 to $200,000, well above the engineer estimates because every year it gets worse. So
and that's been since 1983.
yeah. So
Nobody did.
we're looking at two scenarios here in regards to restructuring money and bringing in new money. in regards to dealing with these ongoing structural issues, because we're starting to get more liability as far as vehicle damages and various other things that are going on. So we want to kind of address something that's beneficial to both the residents as well as beneficial to the village as an operational standpoint.
But then, yeah, again, being on the transportation committee, there's a lot of fundings that's coming about. Someone's spoken of $191 million is going to be available. So there are things that we can reach out to for sources to get fundings or grants.
That's correct, Mayor. And when I spoke to Robinson Engineers, most of those monies are for state highways and transportation routes, and they don't typically have a lot, as you know, a lot of money to deal with residential streets, which is why, and try to explain to the residents, they say, well, why are you doing road repair on University Parkway, or why are you doing something on Cicero? Well, those are grant monies that come in. The village is only paying a percentage of that. And for residential streets, it's very difficult to get those monies, but they are possible, as you said.
But as you, the only way I can see that 1.3 million being a vital number is that a capital bill is passed and we use that 1.3% to pay that 5% or 20% match. But $1.3 million is not going to do much for the roads out here unless that can be used as match dollar or percentage dollars against some grant awards that we get. Because 1.3 million is that you're saying already one street is over 400,000. That's increasing with Davie, and you only talking about another street which is another 200,000. That's half of that gone, and I'm sure we got other streets in town that need to be repaired.
Which are simple resurfacing. Yeah. So I understand exactly what you're saying, Dave. And the 5-year plan is very transparent, so I can provide the five-year road plan. There are only very few streets that need total reconstruction in the village. Then you have some streets that need resurfacing, but eventually will need to do reconstruction. Regardless, we have to start investing more into the infrastructure of the village, into the residential areas, which I think is very important.
Manager Pate, I believe maybe it was not just too long ago, these numbers that you are giving me, was it not, it was about the numbers that you gave, it's not as inflated as...
No, I think one 5-year plan was at about 1.3 to 1.5, and I think the revised 5-year plan came out to be about 2.5, but Robinson Engineers always puts in a buffer just in case there's additional damage to the roadway as they uncover it. So at this point, after January of this year, Robinson Engineering will be going out and doing one more assessment on the roads prior to do this. I understand prior to doing this bond issue, if this new money is going to road repairs, the investor is going to want to see the estimates for the roads. They're going to want to see what the village's plan is and using the money and various things like that. So, like I said, Robinson will be going out starting in January to reassess all the roads so we have a proper estimate and repair.
But there was something, I think, in the spring that when we stopped in and we were in the Director of Public Works office, it was about if anything was urgent. I think if that was the word we had used, if it was urgent, it would be 600,000, which was almost like the numbers you just said, because I can tell you the day after the election that I won, I'm out there picking up my signs, and what's that, Amherst Abbott, it didn't make a difference, tore underneath my truck, and I have a Tahoe, truck never had an issue. So I think, am I correct though, that was about urgent streets that need urgent repairs, about 600,000, those streets that,
right.
yeah.
Abbott, Amherst, you have
Abbott and Amherst are worse.
Yeah.
And various others as we go in.
Thank you.
The other thing about the last page there, this is a 20-year model. So this goes out to 2038. There's also an option that you would go up longer to 25 years. So it does become, as you move through this deliberations, that whether it's a 20-year model, 15-year model, 25-year model, we can run different models at that juncture to indicate the level of revenues that would be able to be generated based on the number of years of to maturity. That's really the end of our prepared comments. Open to answer any questions you might have. You know, it is, unfortunately, these are difficult conversations to have. They're not easy for you. I would certainly recommend, as you move through the deliberations, to look at a 5-year budget. You talk about a 5-year capital plan, and certainly looking forward that it would behoove the village to consider a broad outline of how you climb out of a hole, and what are the decisions that you need to make in order to do that. So there are certainly, has been discussed, both cost-constrained options that you have as well as revenue enhancement options and service levels. So open to answer any questions you might have.
I just wanted to make a comment, actually. Okay, as a finance committee member, I know this is one thing that we have been requesting this year, and I know we've had some limitations with having the manpower in the finance department. But to me, in order for us to really feel that we're getting to a point where we can have a balanced budget, we really do need to know what our true expenditures are. Because we could say this is what we're budgeting, but if we're spending differently, then that means we're getting further out of whack.
So I'll make this statement, and I'm confident of it. The budget's balanced right now. It's just because fund balance, we're having issues with actuals because of the accounting aspect of things being caught up. It's difficult for me to go and put on paper that we're in the black because the accounting systems are not updated. Between now and May 1, with the additional revenues coming in, and there's a couple revenue sources that are pretty much guaranteed to come in. There's some that are not. They supersede $305,000, which is once those revenue numbers come in as realized numbers, the board will actually, this budget will come back before the board for amendment to change it to make it into a balanced budget. When the budget was done, we discussed this at the finance meeting on multiple occasions, that for me to balance the budget without any true accounting is very difficult. Now, as of December 1st, fund balance caught up all the way to FY17. By January, fund balance should be caught up to FY18. At that point, we can do realistic reports. Secondly, the village's auditor has created some spreadsheets so we can kind of do manual input of information so we can start doing calculations. So, you know, I know we hear the word actual, and I understand that, you know, but we're getting towards that point, especially when we're going to start doing our manual calculations. And that's the first part of the manual calculations in the spreadsheet is that revenue study that we're doing. We got a rough draft today, and it looks really, really good to me, and I thank Jacilia for that. And we're going to move forward on the 11th to provide the board the true solidified cash flow analysis, where you can see that we're bringing in more revenue than we're doing the expenditures. If we were not, and I said this in the fantasy, if we were not bringing in more revenue than expenditures than how we operate, we would have to shut this place down. And we have not pulled any money out of the TIPs as of 2011, 2012, 13, 14, even beginning of 15. We saw those inter-fund transfers coming out of the TIP going to general fund. We're not doing that at this point. So that has to be realized, you know. So in actuality, you know, we're closer to a balanced budget than we think we are. You know, I just think the people want to see solidified proof and reports and proper accounting reporting, and I understand that. And I acknowledge that we are moving in that direction.
Well, what I'm saying also is that you said that obviously that we are bringing in more revenue than we are expenditures, but we're already stating first thing in this meeting is that we have to have a talk. So we are not, let me just finish. So that means we are short as of January for meeting our payroll and so forth, for what we have on hand. And that's why we have to do a talk. If we had that money on hand, then we wouldn't have to do a talk.
And it's based on when the expenditures come out and the liabilities come out. That's what it's based on. That's why it's called a tax anticipation warrant. You're paying ahead of time for monies that's coming in the future.
Right, but it's because we need it. That's what I'm saying. So that means we're short. That's the whole thing.
And so we're paying that money back with interest.
I know, but we're doing the talk because we need the money now. When we budget and when we bring our monies in, that's supposed to last us all year. That's why we budget.
And that's been-
But it's not.
It's a cash flow versus a balanced budget issue.
Thank you.
Well, let's distinguish between the two. It's because it's no different than a lot of other school districts, taxing bodies, and businesses. You know, they don't make it at Christmas, and they don't make it for the rest of the year. So they take out a line of credit, or in the case of a municipality, we take out a tax anticipation warrant, or a TIF loan, or you know, whatever, just to get you through that rough period. But still, there's enough revenue to cover the expenses for the year. It's just a cash flow issue.
Many units of government have a 3-month policy for fund balance, so that you have revenues exactly as you're talking about available to work through your ebbs and flows of revenues versus expenses. So when you can develop a fund balance policy and actually have cash to put in there, in those reserves, then you'll be able to eliminate the tax anticipation.
I agree.
Because you have the sufficient reserves available to work through the ebb and flow of the municipal expenses.
And most municipalities between November and the end of January are in this situation because they're making bond payments, they're making longevity payments, they're making all other kind of payments in the month of December that they don't make regularly throughout the year. And because taxes only come in twice a year, that takes a lot of cash flow management to get to that point. And if you're behind on some things, that's how that cash get ate up. So it's not, I don't want to say it's a bad thing to get tax anticipation warrants, I just don't like to do it, but in terms of getting tax anticipation warrants to get you through that period of November through January. Because you have higher expenditures due to bond payments.
I understand that. But again, when we get this one and we have to pay it back in June, then what I anticipate is we're gonna have to get another one because we still have to go further.
The village is gonna have to get tax anticipation warrants for the next at least 3 years until TIF 5 closes and enough tax revenue comes into the coffers to fill that gap. But again, it's not a deficit issue, it is a cash flow issue.
And that's what he was referring to, Dave was referring to, is that once we get a fund balance policy, because we used to have this conversation in the finance committee, should the minimum reserve be 3 months or 6 months of the village's expenditures, you know? Because we had orders to say that you should have about 6 months, and some people said 3 months, but wherever it is, there needs to be a policy that there's enough accumulated cash to be able to cover us over those slow periods, you know? And that's just gonna take a little time, as the manager indicated, to get us there, where we have that cash available.
Yeah, I just wanted to concur with Trustee Payton because, again, when we did our transition, there was a plan, a blueprint that was introduced to me that explained this, and actually even in Manager Pate is making it very clear. It's not a deficit thing, it's a cash flow issue. According to that blueprint, and I said it, if I'm not mistaken, man, then this would be my probably 10th time saying this on this microphone from what Trustee Payton is saying and is correct about it. We are on the right direction. And if I'm not mistaken, I do believe that the number of that blueprint that I seen we would be doing it for at least 3 years. This would be the second time that I know that we would have to pull it, and it may have to be one more year. I'm not sure if, if Manager Pate knows the numbers better than I do, because he see it every single day, because he deal with the day-to-day. But I know that as a board, I know we're gonna have to do it one more time to be at least where we at, or where we wanna be, compared to where we were, from when all this had, happened with the finance.
2020, when the second bond,
2020, when the second bond is there.
when the second bond rolled off, 2020, when the 2003 bond rolled off, you'll be fine.
Thank you.
Right.
2020, and we saw that estimate here on the paperwork, because at that point, and TIP 5 will be expired, and we're looking at least $12 million coming in as revenue in the village. We will no longer have to borrow any money, so that's something that I'm excited about and looking forward to. So we'll be getting a lot more funding at that time. Trustee.
So I just wanted to ask the manager, PA manager, that have you ever seen, when a TIF closes, have you ever seen funds automatically transferred to the village's general fund account after the TIF has closed? Have you ever seen that?
You're asking a scenario-based question?
Yes. Have you ever seen, because see, when I did my research, if a village has never used those TIF dollars for infrastructure and different things like that, that those dollars do not, if they go back to the taxing bodies and not.
Upon the
village
TIF
doesn't
closing, so which
receive a
TIF are you
portion.
speaking of? At the point of the TIF closing, that's correct?
Yes.
You're correct?
Yes.
So you're asking me, have I ever seen it?
Yeah, right. Have you ever seen dollars go into, because see, I wanted to make sure that you don't get the board confused on us receiving dollars after a TIF closes. I mean, because
Upon TIF closing, a TIF audit's done, the money, I'll let you answer.
Yes, it can, dollars can. If you have a TIF committee and that TIF closes, and that TIF committee realizes that it's closed, it's been closed by the state, then yes, whatever dollars are due to village, yes, it can be transferred. But all parties have to be notified what that surplus is and what their shares are, and then yes, it can be transferred after the TIF is closed. That's the purpose of closing the TIF.
Right, thank you. So we're not confused?
Yes.
The board's not confused about it? Thank you. I knew that. Okay. Well, whoever, he said the board.
Because I never seen it since I've been as a village treasurer since 2007, and I have never seen money come from it, because TIF has closed since I've been the treasurer of the village, and I've never seen money
And
transferred.
since you've been treasurer of the village, money was transferred out of TIF 5 into general fund to make payroll as well.
What did you say?
Yeah, because it was automatically transferred from the finance department over into the actual general fund. So,
Once a TIF closes and it's filed with the state and everything is clear, then there's a TIF committee, which includes all taxing bodies. That percentage due to each one of those taxing bodies can be transferred immediately.
And you've only been the treasurer since 2011.
Help me.
sorry,
Not 2007.
I apologize, 11, yes.
Thank you.
That percentage is due to each, not all of them to be transferred to the village.
I know that part, that's right now, I'm saying that we will still receive it, we receive a percentage.
Percentage.
Right, okay. All right, so, that is wrapping. So what I would like to say, this was really good, and I'm happy about it. I'm glad we're finally doing this. I've had to go to the comptroller's office several times to correct things and to beg and to plead, but everything is on track. Looks like it's going well. We're not where we were. We're not where we used to be, but we're definitely not where we were. So I'm looking forward to this and making sure that we have a policy in place, making sure if we have to have our finance committee work with us on this policy, and it will be in place. We will have more accountability and transparency. So I'm really looking forward to this. I'm glad that we're moving forward. And I do, just to let the finance department know, they are, like I said earlier, we have a lot of interest. I have interviews almost every Friday for people that's interested in the town center. Chief Pay and I have interviewed several people, and it's looking very promising. So some of these things will be in the revenue, hopefully in our next budget, as far as revenue seeking for our finance department as well, I'll let you know. Okay? All right. I'm sorry, Trustee.
Okay, Madam Mayor, I believe we're going to action item F, correct? We're going to go into Board of Trustees action, correct? Okay. Madam Mayor, if I can make a motion, I would like to consolidate action items for a single vote. F1, F2, F3, F4, F5, and F6 as a single vote, consolidate for a single vote, if I can get a second on that one.
Second.
Motion on the floor. Second, motion by Trustee Brooks, second by Trustee Wilson. Comment?
Yes, Mayor. I've just got one here. Regarding the resolution F1, on the second page of that resolution, it indicates that the paragraph, second paragraph from the bottom, it says, whereas under the engagement letter, the estimated fees for the land services are in the amount of $4,500 per year, $4,500 per year, for a total of $9,000. This is for 2 years for $9,000. But if you go back into the actual engagement letter, on page 3, page 4 of the engagement letter, at the top it says, I estimate that my fees for these services will be $5,000 per year for a total of $10,000. So there's a contradiction there. Now, the other resolutions are okay, but this is the only one where it looks like it was a, oversight. So, if anything, I'd like to.
Sure.
I printed this out. It looks like the ordinance indicates $4,500 per year for $9,000 total.
Right.
It looks like the exhibit for the TIF 1 engagement letter, the one that got attached to the resolution, was actually for TIF 6. If you look at the top, this is second sentence, please to confirm.
Yeah, TIF 6, right.
TIF 6, so.
It does say tip 6. Where again? Tip 1,
Yeah.
So that's, it looks, I just looked over the TIF 6 resolution engagement letter, that TIF 6 engagement letter is attached. So that would be the discrepancy, is the engagement letter is not correct.
Yeah, so.
It got switched up.
So we didn't get a copy of the engagement letter for TIF 1 then?
Nah, it doesn't.
Unless it's with the.
Unless it got mixed into a separate resolution. I know that the firm provided one.
Two tip 3s.
It looks like all the rest of the resolutions have the correct engagement letter attached.
Attorney Wise, one question for you. When you drafted you saw all the correct engagement letters, correct?
That is correct. I went through and we looked at each engagement letter for each TIF, because the cost that you're actually referring to is different depending on which TIF it is for which years. So we had to go back through and look at each
So based on your review, every resolution is good in order, besides the attachment being misfiled, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
The attachment should, it's basically a form letter, it should say, it would say tip 1, wherever it says tip 6 in this letter, and then the fees would be $4,500 per year for a total of $9,000.
I would ask the board, since the attorney-wise did review each letter and they're good and in order, that the board pass this with the contingency of me forwarding the letter that's missing to you guys, tomorrow.
The actual letter coming to us, okay?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Roll call, please. In combining all of the
Right,
the resolution and engagement letters together.
right.
Trustee Williams. Both sides. Trustee Wilson.
Aye.
Trustee Brooks.
Both sides.
Trustee Payton.
Aye.
Mayor Copeland.
Aye. Now, a motion to approve F1 through F6. Their motion?
So moved.
Moved by trustee Milton Payton, second.
That's the second one. Wait a minute, correct? This is what the amendment.
Yeah,
Motion amendment.
right.
And the documentation for the letter for
Sure.
F1, which is what we just voted.
Right.
But we don't need another motion because we
We
already
have
have
a
a
motion.
motion.
Right, or would I have to amend my motion?
Right.
Would I have
We
to
have to
amend
amend
my
the
motion
motion.
to that? Because
The
I
motion's
already
been
made an
amended.
amendment.
The motion that we just voted on was the motion to consolidate.
Right, okay,
Okay.
right.
Okay, and then he made an amendment. Okay, so now you still want to do the roll call now? Okay.
Okay,
Move to amend it.
Right.
okay.
Okay, this is to amend it. Okay.
Okay, I'd like to move to amend, subject to the proper engagement letter for TIF 1.
Second.
Right.
And to be delivered to us at no
Right.
time. Yes. Okay, moved by trustee Milton Payton, second by trustee Wilson. Roll call.
Trustee Williams. Both sides. Trustee Wilson.
Aye.
Trustee Brooks.
Both sides.
Trustee Payton.
Aye.
Mayor Copeland.
Vote side. F7, motion to accept.
Then we have one more motion.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Any motion, I'm sorry. Main motion for accept. Move and second, right? We have to move.
Motion and second.
You do, okay. I need a motion.
So moved.
Moved by trustee Brooks, second.
Second.
Second by trustee Wilson. Roll call.
Trustee Williams. Both sides. Trustee Wilson.
Aye.
Trustee Brooks.
Both sides.
Trustee Payton.
Aye.
Mayor Copeland.
Vote time.
Motion to pass.
Okay, thank you. F7, motion to accept the 2015 annual financial report, audit report, and management letter from Wadsworth and Amon. Here, would you like to speak on that first before we make a motion?
Sure.
Yes, sir. How you doing?
Son, do you hear me? Hello, everybody. I'm Matt Barron, the audit partner for Lauterbach and Amon, who oversaw your audit the last few years. Great to see everybody again. Here to present on the 2015 audit. I presented on this in July of 16, and nothing has really changed in this audit report. So some of you that have been here, or that were here at that point in time, you'll be hearing the same basic beats of what I'll be going over tonight. But as before, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to ask. Most of those beats have to do with the items that you guys have been already discussing already in terms of the general fund deficit, the Gulf deficit, and overall TIF reconciliation. So most of that had been, had been discussed at that point in time and at all of my previous board meetings that I was there from 09 through 14. So I'm happy to hear that it's the same discussion to be able to push those things forward for the village. So I'm going to start with the audit report and then talk about the management letter after that. I think everybody has a copy of each of them in front of them, so I'll go through certain pages and highlight them as we go. So about 4 or 5 pages into the audit report itself, there's a page that looks like this. It has a Lauterbach and Eamon letterhead on it. This is the opinion page. We gave the village a qualified opinion for 2015. Those qualifications were basically within the general fund and the golf course fund, overall due to the lack of bank recs that have been performed during the year of 2015, and various documentation support that we were unable to receive. In addition to the TIF 5, the expenditures and the reconciliations that hadn't been done and were not being completed at all at that point in time for those for TIF 5. Moving forward from there, we're going to go ahead and go on past the management discussion and analysis, the whole next section. It's basically a narrative summary of everything that is within this audit report. So we'll flip on past that whole section until we can get to the actual pages 4 and 5. At the bottom, you can see there's MD&A 1, MD&A 2. Flip past all those MD&A pages, the last one being MD&A 11, and the actual pages 4 and 5 look like this, the statement of net position. What the statement of net position is, this is a summary of all the funds together into one spot on what we call full accrual accounting. So on page 4, you can see the long-term assets, and on page 5 is the long-term liabilities. At the bottom of page 5 is where I'd like to take us to. In terms of your governmental funds, your total fund balance at the end of the year is about $10 million. Once you take out the capital assets and related debt with that, we're at minus $2.2 million. In this current year for 2015, we had an overall decrease within this of $6.7 million, which basically has to do with the governmental fund operations, which we'll talk about in just a minute. The other number I'd like to point out to you is where things were at in terms of cash versus your accounts payable at the end of the year. Totals of cash, you can see on page 4, is at $2.5 million. When you subtract the accounts payable over on page 10, the actual just current accounts payable, we're at a total negative cash position of $7.5 million at this time. Any questions about these? Should we go forward to the fund level financials?
Yeah, you're on the statement of net position on page 4. I just had a question on this where the line item internal balances.
Yeah.
We had for the governmental activity $7,677,955. Then we have a negative 677, the same number.
Yeah, those are.
Why is that?
The internal amount owed from the golf course fund back to the general fund.
Okay.
Okay, moving forward to pages 8 and 9. This is the actual fund level financials, so the ones that you guys are more used to seeing in terms of being budgeted for. At the far right-hand column are totals again. I'd like to take us to the total fund balance, far right-hand column, second number up from the bottom. We had a total fund balance across all the governmental funds of $675,000. The main fund I'm going to talk about is the general fund in terms of where things ended up. General fund is the far left-hand column on page 8. Total fund balance at the end of 2015 was a minus $15 million. The other number I'd like to point out to you is in the middle, the liabilities number. There's a due to other funds of $24 million. Those are the amounts that need to be ultimately paid back when it comes to TIF 4, TIF 5, and MFT in terms of dollars that have been borrowed over the course of time due to those negative operations across the different funds. So how did we do this year within 2015? Let's go forward to pages 11 and 12. Pages 11 and 12, your overall income statement. Far right-hand column, again, is your totals. How do we do across the entire year, all the funds? Third number up from the bottom on the far right-hand column, page 12. Total decrease of $6.4 million during the year. Overall, how that happened was due to the recognition of some TIF 5 additional TIF 5 expenses during this year.
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, okay, and then also the general fund. And obviously as we focus in on the general fund in terms of how the operations did of your main operating fund, general fund had a total decrease during the year of $4.1 million. Revenues were down from the prior year another $250,000. Expenses were pretty consistent from 2014 to 2015. continue the same pattern of loss at that point in time. There was a $3.9 million loss in 2014 and and obviously we're at $4.1 million for 2015. Going forward then to the last set of financials I want to talk about within here is on pages 14 and 15 of the golf course fund. This had always been a topic of conversation in the board meetings when I've been here, how the operations were doing, and basically you taking the money from the general fund. Page 15 for the golf course fund, the second number, like total fund balance for the golf course fund on page 15, the bottom number is minus 1.8 million. But truly, once you took out capital assets, we were at a minus $7.8 million fund balance. So how do we do this year in 2015? Let's go forward to page 16, please. On page 16 is your income statement for the golf course fund. Third number up from the bottom, we can see a total change in net position of this year of 2015 of minus 750,000. 2014 was minus 744,000. So it was both revenues and expenses were both very consistent from 14 to 15. But again, we're talking another 750,000 of that was required to continue to keep this fund going during 2015, coming from the other funds.
That was already in deck always.
Yes.
Always happens since it's been there.
Yep. Every year, it's been the same discussion of golf courses sucking you dry. Golf courses, you really got to get this thing under control.
Yeah.
We're working on that.
Yep. That is the audit report itself. Before we talk about the management letters, anybody have any questions about the audit report before we move on to the management letter?
I don't really have time to look at it, just seeing it right now, but. Looking at, I know a lot of things we've inherited and we're trying to get it more stable, and I think that's where we're right now. As far as your net, what was the question I had? I'm sorry. Oh, you got it right. So I'm looking at something else. Are some of the suits and liabilities, shall I say, has been, I noticed, negative, and that's been a problem for us, but I noticed that we're changing the process of how that's affecting us. There were so many particular liabilities again of lawsuits and that, and then I noticed something that which our fire department is working on and changed, and I have a top model of what they're doing. We were paying people, which I was totally against always. We found that we were paying $1 million in insurance for employees, retired employees and other employees, 100% medical insurance, and that's $1 million. And that's something that we've taken a stand on now and changing so that will no longer continue to happen. That a person will be here and even at their departure of term of employment, that they will be receiving 100% medical, because that's just a no-brainer, crazy action.
Right, that's not.
And that's not, no one does that.
Sustainable.
Pardon me?
That's not sustainable.
Not at all. So that's something that we've cut out, we've discussed, and we eliminated that. Our chief of police and chief of fire department has showed that. So those are things like that that are big hits. And the liability, we're trying to do better and work better. Now that you know better, you do better. As far as employment, we've instituted more training. So on sexual harassment and other things that we have found to be a lot of our lawsuits that we've had. So we're giving people more training, so that will eliminate a lot of the liability. Because that was killing us for a long time.
Yeah.
And then some of the other things that we're addressing that we're doing different as far as golf course, we're looking at that to regain more revenue. We're looking at a different whole feature on how that operates. So hopefully that'll help out. Town center, like I said, we have interviews of people coming in the town center. I know I was looking at the numbers on that to rent more, and that's really successful for us. We are having a presentation next December board meeting. Someone is very, very interested in development and bringing more revenues, taxpayers here, 75 new families. So hopefully this will be a big difference in the near future for us.
I mean, it sounded like based on village manager
Yes.
Payne's budget, it sounds like things have improved in terms of those things since these numbers. So
Can you speak, I know you were talking, can you repeat what you just said in the mic?
I said, based on what trustee or village manager Pate said during his presentation, it sounded like in terms of the budget dollars, things have started to truly, come around. I mean, that was the big thing for the 2015 financials. My analogy kept being it takes a long time to turn a big yacht around.
Right.
We have to start somewhere, and the beginning was needing to get the general fund to a zero deficit. That was step number one, and then from there you can start to focus on getting things back paid off and continue to move forward.
Yes, we've inherited a lot, and in a few years I've been here, and we're looking around and changing, and it's slow, but it was a big hit. So it's going to take a while for that to change, but it is changing drastically. So more retreats with the board talking to one another better and working together and eliminating, because I know at one point there was an attorney who was paying $1 million. I saw that and I fit about that. That's eliminated. I mean, you have to put a stand on what you're paying, how much you're paying, and what you're not going to pay.
Yep.
So that's all about process and structure. And that's what's happening now with this board. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Sir. On your page 5 for your MD&A, page 5.
Okay.
For the and this is the net position, the business type activities from 14 to 15, they're showing negative numbers under current/other assets. Is that related to the golf course? Why it's negative?
The negative assets have to do with that internal balance of how it rolls up from the government-wide financials. That internal balance you pointed out, Trustee Payton. It's a payment that needs to get made back to the general fund.
Okay.
So that's why it's negative.
Under other liabilities, there was a similar about $7 million increase from 14 to 15. Went from $4,142,000 to $11,059,000.
Yeah.
Is that also related to the golf course?
No, the other liabilities mostly have to do with there's additional accounts payable that need to be made at the end of the year. There was additional TIF 5 payables that we had recognized at the end of the year. There was just overall more payments, or the lack of cash flow. It led to additional AP or accounts payable at the end of the year. So most of that number is included in that.
$2 to $7 million?
I mean, there was quite a few different amounts that got picked up. I mean, we had a $6 million deficit again that year, so.
On the next page, I noticed on the property taxes, so if we looked at the total for 14-15, 14 was $15,650,000, 17 million in 2015. That seems a little high in relation to what we're getting right now. Why is that so high?
Some of those that have to do with TIF. TIF property taxes get added into this number here as well. Most of your discussion tonight was based around what the village is actually collecting themselves to use for their general fund. So part of, we'd have to look into the details of which individual property taxes were higher in that between 14 and 15. I don't have that information on me at this point, but in general, the 17 million is your property taxes for your general operations plus all the TIF dollars coming in.
Okay, because that's what threw me off. I made a comment earlier. You take a look at again, under the general revenues, if you take out the property taxes, and just, there was a total revenue of $22,138,000 for 14, $23,062 for 15, which is a difference of about $6 million, $6,488,000 for 2014 and $6,042,000 for 15. And that would be, and these are other taxes, that would be about, it was 29.3% of the total revenues for 14 and 26.2% for the 2015, which is why I made a comment a little earlier. So, I mean, if we were to take out the TIF revenues, it would be even a higher percentage.
No.
Sure. Your total number
No, because if right now,
in terms of the taxes.
right now, even if you took a look, I'm sorry to get off the side.
go ahead.
But if you took a look at the numbers that he had in there, he had us at about $5.3 million for property taxes. The $5.3 million included the debt that we're receiving for the property taxes. It also included the pension dollars that were in there. It also included MRF. It also included all that. So when you take all that out, your corporate number is only 3.8, which is the reason why they're telling you that you can't get more than 3.8 in your tax anticipation number.
Well, see, but
Because that's all that's going to the general fund.
right, but what I'm looking at here on page 6 of the MD&A is, and I understand it includes the TIF revenue, but we're looking at for the other taxes, utility taxes, other taxes, sales taxes, income tax, replacement taxes, interest income and miscellaneous is $6 million for 2015. Right, damn, right, right.
Yeah, okay, you're right, about six, for charges and other things, yeah, other
Right.
revenue is about 6 million. Yeah.
Right, so if you were to take out these other pieces, assuming that they're in that, the property tax thing, those numbers, I'm assuming, will stay the same, the proportion then becomes higher than the 26% that I'm looking at here.
Yeah,
And that's why I had the question.
But then you only still got the 3 million that you got coming from the taxes, that still puts you right around 9, a little over $9 million for your general fund.
But what I'm looking at is that these other taxes for 2015 were 26.2% of the total revenues.
Yeah.
Just, other than the property taxes.
Yeah, right,
Right,
besides,
so if
that's
I-
all the property taxes,
Right.
right?
So if I were to take those other things out, that lowers the base, it increases the percentage. Doesn't lower the percentage.
No, if you take them all out, it reduces the revenue balance and then
Total
the
revenue,
percentage.
right.
And then that percentage goes down.
No, the percentage goes up.
Yeah, well, it's
Mathematically, it goes up.
Well, 6 year, 6 versus your 3 year. So you get like 60% of other revenues versus a third for your.
Right, which was the question that I had, why is the proportion so high? And that's why I didn't understand that property tax number, why it was so high. Because all these other, that's, how do these even come up to $6 million?
Well, you included the golf course revenue, and some of that is the 1 million, 1.1 million. I mean, the difference between if you just look at governmental activities, you have 17 million versus 22 million, so that's $5 million total. And from there, you can drill into each of those to kind of know what everything is. I mean, you get a fairly substantial amount of state shared revenue, utility taxes, like those kinds of things. It's all pretty normal stuff. There.
See, I was assuming that under the miscellaneous general revenues, the line miscellaneous was the last line in that.
Yep, 515,000.
For 14, it was 1,283,000, and then for 15, it was 585 in terms of revenue, and that would come from the golf course. That's probably because they shut the golf course down in the wintertime, so there was a big drop there.
That was up in the golf course is up in change. Charges for services 1.1 million.
Right, they are the business activity.
You have them both split. You have
Yeah.
governmental and business type as the two. You're looking at the grand totals across
Right.
the entire village, which includes the golf course and town center.
Right. Yeah.
So at the end of 2015 for miscellaneous was $515,000 for miscellaneous revenue.
Right, yeah, and which is the other piece, this miscellaneous revenue, I'm assuming most of that was the golf course, and may have been some of the town center in there. In the expenses, though, we broke out town center and golf course separately for expenses, and I was wondering why it was done separately in the expenses, so that, as opposed to combining it, I'm assuming they were combined under the miscellaneous.
No, it's up all the way at the top. If you follow that line for the expenses for where you see town center and golf course, if you follow all the way up to the top, charges for services is there. In terms of the 515 miscellaneous revenues, those are all general fund revenues that come
Services
in.
would be the golf course.
Right, golf course and that.
Okay, well, all right.
In terms of miscellaneous revenue, that predominantly was the garbage bag disposals. That was 371,000 of that number.
Well, it's still, okay, that's good.
Okay. Any other questions about the audit report until we go to the management letter? All right, the management letter is the other bound document that you guys were provided. What the management letter is additional information that we're providing to management of comments that don't exactly fit within the audit report that we want to communicate to you. We typically break these up into kind of, 3 separate categories of informational, best practices, and internal control type issues. At the end of 2015, we had 27 total comments at that point in time. I've been over these with, Village Manager Pate and Mr. Hanley going forward, so I don't know if we need to go into them. I went into them in great detail when I came out to present for the 2015 audit, but I wanted to talk about a few of the main significant ones from here. 7 main ones that I just wanted to call out. Current year recommendation number 1, the financial condition. Obviously, that's been a big topic of conversation tonight in terms of the overall financial condition of the village and where things were at 2015 and needing to, do serious looks at the budgets and where things are at in terms of what the money's being spent on. Current management recommendation number 2, TIF 1 and TIF 2 closing. At this point in time in 2015, initially we were told by the administration before that TIF 1 and TIF 2 had been properly closed, and that's where the audit reports had them not in the reports any longer, starting in 2012. At this point, as of this, we had learned that they weren't formally closed by the state, or to the state, to the county. So at that point in time when we were out here, if you guys remember, there was Gary Bowler, Bob Loers, they were working on the TIF reconciliations to try to ultimately determine what the amounts were that were used by the general fund for TIF 1 and TIF 2. All of the opinions that we provided from 2009 through 2012 upon that closing, we had qualified our opinions for the use of the TIF dollars by the general fund at that point in time. So ultimately, when it became that it was not actually formally closed and they really needed to do a full reconciliation, this comment came back up again to do it. The other comments to point out as we move forward in the report, there's a prior year recommendation number 1 is the next government accounting standard that's coming up, which is GASB 68, has to do with the pension liabilities. Once that does come on board, just to give you guys a preview, because we audit the pension funds, that number is going to be at about another $17 million of liability to those government-wide financial statements. The next one I just want to call out is prior recommendation number 10, which is the TIF reconciliations. That had been a big topic every year, 2009 through 2015, of needing to do TIF reconciliations for every single TIF. And as Mayor Covington was asking about getting that information, that would have been a comment each year of needing to get that information, how important that is, and that those TIF dollars are being used truly for TIF eligible expenses. Prior recommendation number 11 had to do with bank recs and having a formal bank rec process that happened each year. At the time within 2015, those had started to finally happen the following year. So as Julia probably remembers, the plan was to be moving forward into 16 with a possibility of an unqualified opinion because bank recs were starting to be done on a monthly basis. Obviously things have happened and whatever, here we are today. But the bank recs at this point in time in 2015, that helped lead to the qualified opinion, and they weren't being done properly on time at this point. Prior recommendation number 21 had to do with the interfunds. I called that out in terms of needing to repay those TIFs and the MFT dollars. Those are restricted dollars that have to get paid back. And then the last one I want to talk about is prior recommendation number 23 is the pension contributions. The pension contributions done by the village historically have been below what the actuaries have been asking, which is causing the liability to continue to rise in terms of what the unfunded amount is for the villages to the pension funds. So it's been happening each year. It continues to happen just as, as we audited the pension funds in terms of what the actuary asked for versus what the village actually contributed to pension funds. So something to also keep an eye on as you're moving forward.
Matt, quick question, because I know you audit the pension funds.
Yeah.
So I sent out a request, maybe about a month and a half ago, requesting their numbers to be input into our levy, and I have not gotten any type of communication back.
Who did you email it to?
Both the police and pension fund attorneys, because we were, at that time we were dealing with some litigation-related issues.
Were you looking for the levy report?
Yes. What recommended levy for police and fire pension going into this levy
I can.
in December.
Either I'll send it to you or I can have the actuaries send it directly to you.
That'd be great.
Because
we're looking to pass it on December 11th, so if I can get it before that time, I can get over to the village attorney.
I just got just a couple quick
for both
things.
police and fire.
Just a couple of quick things. One, I'd just like to comment, and I've got a question on the outstanding check write-off policy.
Yep.
Where it says that this is number 2.
Prior recommendation number 2.
Yeah, I was just wondering, we have the second part of the first sentence is we noted a number of old outstanding checks. I was just wondering, what do you define as old? Is that 6 months or a year or what?
Typically over, there's 2 qualifications that we usually look at for that. Once you're having a significant number of them go over a year, that's an issue because you don't have a proper procedure in place that are allowing checks to not be followed up upon to be cleared. Second issue, the state just changed this in terms of their unclaimed property statute. It used to be 7 years, now it's 3, that you're supposed to turn over the money for unclaimed property over to the state. So, we typically look at 2 different, we don't give this all the time. It kind of depends on if there are other procedures in place and if there actually is an issue going on. At this point in time with 15, there was a significant number of outstanding checks that were still sitting on the books.
The second thing I would just like, just so that the public who may see this won't misinterpret, or if they are to FOIA this audit report, that this reflects the fiscal year 2014-15, and so some of the comments that are made is that it hadn't been worked on. This means that it hadn't been worked on, because I know some of the things are in here we have recently started working on. This was as of 2015.
Correct.
Right.
During our
so
audit.
even though if we made some changes, the policies, the financial manual, all those kind of things have happened within the last year, it wouldn't be reflected in this audit.
Correct. Basically where this stands is technically as of when I last presented in July of 2016. When I presented this at that time, these things had not occurred then.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure.
And I was happy to hear also Trustee Payton, you brought up the fund balance policy. Obviously that had been a topic many times here in this room of the need for that to get passed. So I was happy to hear that's been a discussion lately. That's comment number 5. So,
But I'm really going to take this in our retreat, and all of these things are going to be addressed. We have been addressing these in our retreat. We have another one scheduled. Because this is one thing that's irritated me too. During the current year procedures, when you talk about compensation and absences.
Yeah.
Because again, automation. I want to put in a position. I want to put in a system that it will be automated when people are taking vacation and that, because I noticed that we paid out a lot. And some say I can't believe no one's ever taken a vacation. And then we're paying out to people and we have no tracking system. So that's what I mean by automation. It's called open government. It's a system that when I was in Miami, that I went through Tech Summit, and that application will be implemented in this. So we will be tracking, and it will be a lot of more automation, so we can track such things as this. And people are retiring, and you're giving them tons of vacation time, and you don't know when they took off, who's taking off.
Right.
And it's just maddening to me, and it's just not structured again. That's my word, structure. So those things we're talking about doing and putting that in place now, and it doesn't take much to get that done.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, it protects someone else in, it's already done. So the system is in place. It's just us adopting it, which we'll do.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions about the management letter or anything else about the audits overall?
Baby Larry, we have some comments. Time to really have time.
So I guess we'll take the motion.
I think the motion's already on.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So moved.
Moved by trustee Wilson, second
Second.
by trustee Brooks, sorry. Trustee Brooks. Roll call.
Trustee Williams? Both sides. Trustee Wilson?
Aye.
Trustee Brooks?
Both sides.
Trustee Payton?
Aye.
Mayor Covey?
Vote side.
Motion passed.
Thank you. And a motion, I'm sorry.
No, just want to say thank you, everybody. It's been, good working with you guys, and I wish you guys luck going forward in the future.
Thank you.
I just want to say, hopefully when you see us again,
Oh,
you won't have pages and pages of prior recommendations.
but they're good. I need it though. We need recommendations, so we can.
No, it should be prior.
Right, not prior. No. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Motion for an adjournment.
So moved.
Moved by trustee Wilson, second.
Second.
Second by trustee Brooks. Roll call.
Trustee Williams? Both sides. Trustee Wilson?
Aye.
Trustee Brooks?
Both sides.
Trustee Payton?
Aye.
Mayor Covey?
Yes, aye. Thank you all for attending. Very, very informative.